Have you ever had trouble motivating yourself to practice your music or do your art? Learning a musical instrument or mastering an art or becoming an actor. All of these take a lot of work, right? And there might be times in your life where, like, if you're a musician, you're just looking at your music stand and there's your music and it's just staring at you and you just don't feel like doing it. You know you should, but you just don't feel like doing it. And a lot of times people can have stories about themselves like, oh, I'm just lazy, or like what's wrong with me? Why can't I just get over it and make myself do it? But the thing that everybody misses is that this attitude of like viewing yourself as being wrong for not being motivated and then making yourself practice anyway is actually part of the problem. It creates a vicious cycle where you're doing too much hard work, or hard work in a way that's disconnected from something that actually brings you alive, an intrinsic motivation, and then you just get burnt out and you don't have the energy to really do something that you actually love. So today I'm going to share with you some insights about this and a practice that you can do on your own at home to help illuminate how you can have more motivation, a kind of motivation that comes from within, a motivation that actually feels good and inspiring and isn't the kind of hard-driven, make-yourself kind of motivation that's so common. So my name is Joseph Arnold. I'm a violinist, an Alexander Technique teacher, and director of the Soul Force Arts Institute. And what I'm going to share with you today is actually an excerpt from my upcoming book. It's called Soul Force Arts, the vital role of musicians and other artists in a world that's lost its mind. So this is from chapter 5 on what I call the yoga of art. So I'm just going to read this excerpt, and then at the end, I'm going to share the exercise that you can do on your own at home. Okay, this section is called The War Against the Self and the Fallacy of Willpower. And it begins with two quotes. The first quote is from James Gordon, who I believe is an actor. It's not that some people have willpower and some don't. It's that some people are ready to change and others are not. And the second quote is from Charles Eisenstein, my favorite author, from The Yoga of Eating, his book. In a divided self, willpower is a puny thing. Okay, here's my own words. So what motivates you in your creative practice? And how do you respond when your motivation runs out? This is an essential question for all artists. Mastering your art form clearly requires motivation to work hard, get through the challenging times, and make sacrifices, after all. And yet, what many fail to grasp about the path to mastery is that the place from which your motivation comes has an enormous impact on your quality of life and art. The trouble is that the predominant form of motivation in our society is really a form of inner conflict, what I call the war against the self, in which there is a battle of wills between a part of you that wants to do something and another part that doesn't. For many in our society, the war against the self is so familiar as to be invisible, and thus goes largely unquestioned. But as we shall see, despite its ubiquity, the war against the self is a poor basis for the creation of transcendent art. The war against the self is a natural outgrowth of the story of separation. It is a profound form of self-rejection which says that your body and its feelings are somehow base, unruly, untrustworthy, and in need of constant vigilance and correction. In this story, the only solution for when you don't feel like doing something is to steel yourself against your lack of motivation, to rally your willpower, and just make yourself do it. But it turns out that this strategy has some serious drawbacks. If you've ever tried to change a habit through sheer force of will, then you will already know that willpower is a finite resource. one that is quickly drained by injudicious use. In fact, the overuse of willpower actually leads many to the challenges that artists commonly face: physical tension, emotional strain, creative ruts, and burnout. What's vital to understand is that if these are the challenges that currently hinder progress in your creative life, I lost my place there, then your progress will only be further hindered by the use of yet more willpower. Indeed, for many highly trained musicians and other artists, your creative gains will only be made possible by finding an alternative to willpower. This is because the overuse of willpower is part of a vicious cycle which causes the very problems it's trying to solve. The answer, as we saw with Playing from the Heart, is instead to connect with what truly brings you alive. And so, just a reference there, I'm referencing the previous chapter on Playing from the Heart, and I have other videos you can see on this channel on what that really means. So, the answer, as we saw with Playing from the Heart, is instead to connect with what truly brings you alive. Learning to connect with this and then letting it lead your artistic life will not only relieve many of your current challenges, but will yield unexpected creative fruit that simply cannot be otherwise found through effort and toil. For example, instead of saying, "This is what I have to do today," you could ask, "What would bring me the most alive today?" But for many, the war against the self is so entrenched that the mere notion of letting go of the rigid application of willpower and following what feels good instead brings up intense anxiety. But wait, you might say, if I just let myself do whatever I want, how could I possibly reach my goals? Won't I just become a lazy bum, doing nothing but eating donuts and watching Netflix? Notice here the underlying assumption that your innate desires are somehow bad and unworthy. Sure, it's true that if you're used to a life of self-denial and self-control, that if you give yourself a break, you may end up catching up on some much-needed rest and relaxation and enjoyment. But that wouldn't last forever. Maybe you'd lay around for a day or two, but eventually you get tired of being in bed, perhaps, and you want to eat something other than just donuts. So you get up and you do something else, perhaps engaging in a creative project, spending time with friends, or doing other things that actually nourish your body, mind, and soul. For many, the road back to soul force begins with a healthy dose of such nourishment. The yoga of art is founded on the idea that there is an innate intelligence inside you, one that tells you when to rest, when to act, and what to do. With practice, what you may discover is that acting upon this intelligence consistently brings you more alive. At the very same time, this practice will also show you any old habits, beliefs, or behaviors that represent areas of disconnection in your life. When you notice these, remember that these are simply your inheritance from a society that consistently serves the lesser gods, which I referred to earlier in my book, Money, Status, Technology, and Power. That consistently serves the lesser gods rather than what brings us alive. And the lesser gods are jealous. Seen from their vantage point of disconnection, anything that brings you more alive is often viewed with suspicion. Keep this in mind when you practice the yoga of art. Be aware of any harsh judgments that come up, because the parts of you that still serve the lesser gods may tell you that what brings you alive is stupid, irresponsible, lazy, childish, or insane. In the long run, however, you may discover that the real insanity is ignoring the very real consequences of acting in service of the lesser gods. Because doing so disconnects you from what is alive inside you. It makes you feel contracted, heavy, and uninspired. So again, I'm talking about the lesser gods here, just as an aside. So one of the theses in my book, one of the premises, is that a lot of the challenges that musicians and artists currently face are caused by being in service to money, status, technology, and power. And you might not think of yourself as being that way, but these things are very sneaky. and they really color so much of how the arts are taught and learned and propagated, and like how you make a living as an artist. So this is really about like looking under the hood at what are the deeper motivations, and whenever you're motivated in service, motivated really by anything other than what brings you alive, then there's going to be problems. So that's what's going on here. So I'll continue. Okay, because being in service of the lesser gods disconnects you from what is alive inside you. It makes you feel contracted, heavy, and uninspired. These consequences then are not a sign that there's something wrong with you. Far from it. It makes perfect sense to feel disconnected when doing something just for the money, for instance. Seen in this way, such disconnection reveals itself to be a sign of your innate intelligence at work. So when you're feeling unmotivated, the real question is not how to manipulate or force yourself into following some preconceived plan, which is just the war against the self, but instead to ask where your motivation is coming from. Thus, the real problem behind a lack of motivation isn't an insufficient use of willpower. It's that you're not connected to what truly brings you alive. If you were connected to this, you would have no problems with motivation at all. If you were in touch with what brought you alive, wild horses couldn't keep you from your creative practice. The real answer then is to get back in touch with what brings you alive and learn how to let that lead your every artistic decision. Okay, so here's the practice. It's a reflection, a journal entry practice that you can do. So it's called The Role of Willpower in Your Life. And just have a few prompts here that you might consider and write things down, and you'll get more out of it if you actually do the practice. So set aside maybe 5-10 minutes to do this. Really let the question sink in, and then actually write a few things down. I promise you'll get something out of it if you do that. Consider the role of willpower in your life. What are the times when you most often force yourself to do things you don't really want to? What motivates those decisions? Reflect on moments of physical tension, emotional stress, slow progress, creative ruts, or burnout. What's the role of willpower in each of these situations? What stories or feelings come up for you when you consider letting go of willpower and instead letting yourself do what feels good? What fears or judgments might you have about yourself or someone else who did this? Just spend a few minutes journaling about all that. I'll put this prompt in the description of the video below. Okay, well, I hope that sparked something for you. And I hope it put a crack or a chink in the story of willpower, which really is the biggest mistake that almost everybody in our society, including artists and musicians, make when trying to get better at something, when trying to do something hard. Okay, so yeah, let me know what you think of this video, if this was helpful for you. As always, if you want to stay in touch on this channel, please do subscribe and maybe like this video. And if you want to sign up for my newsletter, you can go to josepharnold.com. Yeah, I think that's it for now. Okay, see you next time.